Good morning, Jamf Nation. If you are here for the Embracing Neurodiversity in IT, building inclusive workplaces for all, you are in the right room. Congratulations. Awesome. Great start to your Thursday morning. So a little bit about our speaker. He is a senior IT officer from the St. Vincent's Institute of Medical Research. Please welcome to the stage, Rowan Quigley.
Thank you, Chris. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming, especially on this early Thursday. I heard a few of you went out karaokeing last night, so I hope you're doing better than some of those out there. So first, I'd like to say with this disclaimer, I'm not a medical professional and I'm not a lawyer, but I will be mentioning bits and pieces regarding law and bits and pieces regarding medical bits and pieces. So please do take that into consideration. Speak to your doctor, speak to your lawyer if you have any questions or any concerns about anything I talk about. But this conversation, this presentation is about my experiences, my circumstances. You're welcome to take photos and notes, but please no flash photography. So who am I? Well, my name is Rowan. I'm 28 years old. I'm from Australia, if you couldn't tell from this twangy accent. I work for St. Vincent's Institute of Medical Research, and I'm located in Melbourne, where I've been for the past 6.5 years. I'm the senior IT officer, and my role is looking after all endpoint devices at SVI. But, well, why am I talking today? Well, I'm neurodiverse. I was diagnosed with ADHD last year, and I was relieved when I finally discovered that I wasn't just weird, but that I had a disorder that caused me so much angst and struggles over the preceding years. I still have those struggles now, but I'm aware of it, and that makes a huge difference. What led me to pursuing my diagnosis was browsing TikTok. The algorithm saw something in me, and it showed me hundreds of ADHD videos. That wanted me to investigate further. Also, during the pandemic, I came across old school reports and mentioning things like, Rowan is a great student in the classroom, if only would he apply himself, and Rowan struggles with returning work on time. It would not surprise me to hear if he procrastinates and leaves things to the last minute. These were all true, reflective of how I struggled in school. I managed to find after school, as I thoroughly enjoyed my work, but I was masking. And that started to show its cracks during the pandemic, which led me to my diagnosis. This is an overview of the topics I'll be covering today: understanding neurodiversity, the benefits of neurodiversity, creating inclusive workspaces, supporting neurodiverse talent, and building awareness and advocacy. My intent today is to provide an overview of neurodiversity, apply it to an IT perspective, and to leave you here today with a better understanding and to start conversations into the future. We experience social stigma and preconceived notions about who we are, and I hope today will give you some insight into that world. First, I'll say I won't have too many text-heavy slides, but this is one of the few exceptions. So what is neurodiversity? Well, it's a concept that recognises and respects the variety of neurological differences among individuals. It promotes the idea that neurological differences such as autism, ADHD, dyslexia, anxiety, dysgraphia, dyspraxia, dyscalculia, OCD, Tourette's and others are natural variations of the human genome rather than disorders to be cured. This isn't an exhaustive list, as definitions differ between those in the community and academics. You'll hear terms such as spicy brain, neurospicy, soup or soup for brains, but the common term is neurodiversity, as the term used in most literature. In parts of the talk, I'll discuss those who are disabled and those who are neurodiverse. Why? Not everyone who is neurodiverse considers themselves disabled. Personally, though I have struggles in my life, I don't feel overall disadvantaged compared to others and do not consider myself disabled. Others may differ, however. That said, we do have a tendency that we need to prove ourselves to others, that we're just as good as anyone else, and that can be to our detriment. More on that later. An estimated 15 to 20% of the world's population exhibits some form of neurodivergence. Some sources have this figure as high as 30%. So we're not talking about a small number of people here. If you want this in figures, we're looking at between 1.2 to 1.6 billion people. Each type of neurodiversity can present its own strengths and difficulties, and I'll give you some examples. We'll touch on these briefly. As you can see, here are some difficulties. These can be an immense challenge for anyone, but especially those with neurodiverse traits. I can personally speak of having issues with most of these difficulties. I'm really good at distracting my colleagues and really good at being distracted by them. I'm impulsive, and I'd rather work on projects that interest me than some of the work that comes across my desk. Getting things done on time is an immense challenge, as I can't often break tasks down. This talk took me much longer than I anticipated due to the poor time management skills, but I somehow managed to get it in on time. I don't think too highly of myself. I'm great at being a cheerleader for my colleagues when I can see they're doing good work, but not for myself. Those examples I gave were for myself though, and I feel as that I'm within the autism ADHD crowd. If you were to have dyspraxia or dyslexia, you may have some of the following difficulties: poor reading and writing skills, slower processing speed, poor self-esteem, difficulties with fine motor coordination, poor organisational skills, or mental fatigue. All of these traits are manageable though. Through workplace accommodations, through discussions with your manager or team leader, they can be overcome with some work. We'll cover examples of what this may look like later in the talk. On the flip side though, here are our strengths. Again, personally, I can see that in some areas I have a good attention to detail. I often ask questions that are often overlooked when we're in the planning phase of a project. I fortunately work in a smaller organisation where I know everyone's name. I can have a colleague walk through the door and remember the last time I saw them and the issue that they had. It can be years between us seeing each other, but I can recall that detail. I also remember asset numbers for our frequent flyers. If I receive a project that really aligns with what I'm interested in at that particular time, my hyper-focus can get things done in a time period that seems unrealistic. And my role, still partially help desk, is being able to come up with a workaround or figuring out an issue on the fly is really fun and something that really taps into my skill set. Again, with being partially help desk, I can empathise when someone comes into the office with an issue that's really frustrating them. I can put myself in their shoes and see what can be done to try and resolve the issue in an acceptable manner. That said, if you were to have dyslexia or dyspraxia, you'd have the following strengths: problem-solving skills, creativity, big picture thinking, determination and resilience, empathy and creative thinking skills. But just to say, just because we have different traits doesn't mean that we're better or worse than anyone else. We just have different challenges that we need to face, and with the support of our friends, family and colleagues and organisation, we can be just as good as anyone else. This leads me to medications. Medications can assist those with neurodiversity, and in those examples provided earlier, but they're not a magic bullet. Depending on the specific condition, options might include stimulants, non-stimulants, and/or antidepressants. However, it's important to recognise that not everyone can, wants to, or finds success with medication. Personally, I've tried 4 different medications to find one that works for my ADHD. Along the way, I met severe side effects that affected my job performance and required taking sick leave to manage withdrawal symptoms. Finding the right medication is often a trial and error process. We're not yet at a point where we can determine the perfect medication through a simple test, so experiences may vary wildly. Choosing not to use medication is completely valid. I take medication as needed rather than on a daily basis. For example, I'm not taking any now. But this leads to masking. Let's start with the generic example that everyone's familiar with. Masking involves presenting a version of yourself that fits a particular situation, such as a workplace. A common example is during a job interview. In this scenario, you aim to present yourself positively, adjusting your behaviour to meet the expectations of your potential employer. This might involve physical changes, getting a haircut, wearing nice clothes, as well as personality changes, such as being more cheerful in conversation, laughing at jokes more readily, and emphasising your positive traits. Now that we have that example, let's provide more specific examples of what masking can look like day to day. Staying quiet to ensure you're not interrupting others or talking too much. Being unable to relax leading up to appointments, arriving early, sitting in your car to ensuring you're not late. Excessively writing down everything so you don't forget it. Being irritable when you force yourself to concentrate on something that doesn't interest you for extended periods of time. Suppressing stimming behaviours like leg bouncing so you don't disturb others even if you don't feel comfortable sitting still. Mimicking behaviours of others in order to fit in social situations. Masking is our way of changing how we're perceived by others. We spend a lot of time ensuring that we aren't perceived as different, but after learning of our diagnosis, sometimes we spend time trying to peel back the layers of the mask and finding our true selves. This is a challenging prospect and is something that can take years to unfold. As I was diagnosed roughly 18 months ago, it's been a journey to learn about all the different ways I've been masking most of my life without even realizing I've been doing it. A quick example I can give is this. I pick up speech patterns of others and accents. I worked with a colleague from New Zealand and my accent started to adapt to his without even really realizing it. Sometimes the mask is a conscious decision though. I act very differently to friends I've known for years compared to meeting someone for the first time, and that's something everyone can relate to. But it can seem so much more intense once you get to know me. I try my best to ensure I don't talk over others and wait my turn, even though I'm struggling inside to make sure I remember what I want to say next in the conversation. With my friends though, talking over the top of each other the entire time, keeping up with it, we may seem insane. Masking can be detrimental to our mental health, however. If we're always on, for a better term, how do we switch off? Can we control that behaviour? Can we even switch off by choice? If you work in an environment where you're constantly masking, adapting your mask to fit what your employer wants to see, and the suppression of your identity, this can lead to burnout. Burnout, we're familiar with the concept. Some of you in the room may have even experienced it. It's not unique to being neurodiverse, but it can be more dangerous for us and can occur more often in our lifetimes. Causes for burnout can include conflict with colleagues, prolonged overworking, feeling under-challenged, constant time pressures, extreme commitment. For neurodiverse reasons, it can be difficulty organising and prioritising our workloads, masking behaviours, social situations, being in an environment that can't or doesn't want to accommodate us. The burnout symptoms you're familiar with, exhaustion, feeling unable to cope, feeling numb, having trouble concentrating, this can happen to all of those who experience it. For neurodiverse burnout, we can have these symptoms and more: increased sensory sensitivity, loss of skills, increased meltdowns, reduced capability of living independently, and shutting down. But what does recovery look like? Well, a 2020 study regarding autistic burnout informs us of the following strategies for a successful recovery: acceptable and social support, time off work, reduced expectations, and being in an environment where you can unmask safely. Neurodiverse burnout can range from days, weeks, months, or even years in extreme circumstances. Having a dialogue open with our manager and employer ensures we deal with our personal stresses before they become severe, and even we're forced to take sick leave in order to deal with our challenges. We'll discuss how we can address these challenges later in the talk. Now that we've covered what neurodiversity is, our strengths and difficulties, what masking is, and how we can contribute to burnout, let's discuss what benefits we can bring to an organisation. Neurodiverse employees can be an immense struggle for employers. They see the challenge of hiring neurodiverse individuals as complicated, and they struggle to adapt their hiring practices or their internal workflows to work with us. That said, we have organisations out there that have neurodiversity hiring programs. SAP has an Autism at Work program, which they introduced in 2013, boasting a 90% retention rate. Microsoft has a neurodiversity hiring program. Dell, JP Morgan Chase, Goldman Sachs, Ford, Capital One, Google's cloud team, and EY are all companies with programs that allow those with disabilities and those who are neurodiverse the opportunity to interview with and potentially receive employment opportunities. EY, one of the big 4 accounting firms in the world, started a pilot program in 2016 with the goal of hiring more people with autism and completed their studies in 2019 regarding dyslexia in the workplace. They found that people with dyslexia on average have exceptional skill sets in leadership, creativity, originality, and pushing initiatives. We're seeing organisations adjusting their hiring practices though, working on bringing cultural, ethnic, gender, age, and disability diversity to their organisation. As a result, we're seeing some organisations making the leap when it comes to having specific programs to hire those with neurodiversity and having it as a part of their inclusion and diversity programs, or as a program on its own. All of these are welcome, and I hope to see more organisations taking the time to introduce programs like this in the future. We'll step through some of these brief examples, but that said, not all of us have these skilled traits. Commitment and loyalty, I personally put my organisation at the forefront of everything I do. Everything is in their best interest and in my best interest. Many organisations see high retention rates for people with neurodiversity. I mean, I've been at my current employer for nearly 7 years now. Diverse perspectives and problem solving, we provide innovative solutions and we have the ability to think outside the box. As a result of that, we can provide perspectives not otherwise thought about and providing those examples in team-based work can lead to overall better decision-making. We're working ourselves and our skill sets. Through masking, we have a skill set for our adaptability, which can carry over into our day-to-day work. We're also seen as being really good in stressful situations, being able to remain cool, calm, and collected. High levels of intellect and critical thinking, we have really good pattern recognition abilities. Through our abilities to hyper-focus on certain topics, we can become subject matter experts on a variety of different topics. It's often why you see people who are neurodiverse in positions such as data analysis, software development, or research and development roles. And representation and equality. People like seeing people like themselves in the workplace. That said, finding academic papers that cover this topic is a struggle. Most papers cover what we're bad at, but not what we're good at, and are often biased towards a particular narrative or a skew of results due to lack of subjects. Papers don't cover those of us with the proper support that we can become well regarded in our fields. Being able to see information in papers such as our backgrounds, formal education, salary, hours of employment, job satisfaction, and our future career attainment would be immensely helpful, not only for us, but for employers and for psychologists to be able to better treat and support our needs. Without this information, why would an employer go out of their way to hire someone who is neurodiverse if they believe we're difficult to work with, that we'll ask too much of them, and that we won't give them an output that they want? They may have preconceived notions of what it means to be with us and how to deal with us, and I can't blame them when information about this is really vague. I can only hope that more of us become more comfortable in this discussion with our employers, and that we can change the narrative, and that more work will be done in the academic space to better inform people and give employers actionable outcomes to work with. I'm not saying that we're not being hired, that's a different narrative. I know a lot of people who hide their traits during an interview stage to ensure they don't come across as different, or to provide an employer a reason not to hire them, only to discuss what this looks like if we want to have an open discussion regarding neurodiversity in hiring. We'll be discussing what changes can be made for organisations wanting to attract neurodiverse talent later in the talk. Now that we've covered what organisations are taking in a different approach to hiring practices, let's discuss creating inclusive workspaces. This section of this talk is going to split into two topics: recruitment and hiring practices and workplace accommodations. As discussed, some organisations are looking into adjustments to their hiring practices when looking for neurodiverse talent. These can be the following: clear, concise, and specific language in a job advert. This would include clear examples of what they're looking for in specific skill sets. We've seen all those job adverts where they're looking for a unicorn, but also highlighting their commitment to hiring those with neurodiversity. Maybe a mission statement on their website, or something in the job listing providing information for those who are neurodiverse. Adapted recruitment processes, offering the ability to have a pre-recorded video interview before proceeding through a traditional interview process, or offering a short internship or take-home skill-based assessment. Interview questions, getting a list of the interview questions in advance so you can prepare for them. Making the interview process more comfortable, not having a table with the interviewers on one side and the interviewee on the other, but switching up for a round table instead. And onboarding and training, switching up the training during the induction phase, not pushing all the training through an online portal where the content is dry and hard to follow. I know a lot of organisations that the onboarding process is a box-ticking exercise, but providing meaningful training will assist those in the events of incidents. This section will cover workplace accommodations. They can be known as equal employment provisions in the US, or adjustments as they're known in Australia and the UK. And I'll discuss brief discussions on legal ramifications for employers. Again, I'm not a lawyer. What is an accommodation? Well, it's a compromise or flexibility agreement with your employer. This can be an implementation of equipment, services, or changes to requirement. The workplace accommodations aren't necessarily personal. Accommodations could impact a team or an organisation. Workplace accommodations can have positive benefits for all staff. If I were to request a workplace accommodation under the letter of the law, they must be reasonable accommodations. We'll go through some examples of what a reasonable accommodation would look like. In the state of Victoria, my home state, the rule of thumb is behind a reasonable accommodation is it mustn't be expensive and it mustn't be disruptive to the organisation. Keep these in mind as we work through the examples shown. In the United States, your rights to requesting workplace accommodations for disability is protected under the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990. Your state or territory may have relevant laws in place for this as well. In Australia, my rights to requesting workplace accommodations for disability is protected under the Disability Discrimination Act of 1992. Same as the US, different states and territories have different laws regarding this process. And last but not least, your rights as a UK citizen are protected under the Equality Act of 2010. We'll be going through some examples of reasonable accommodations, but isn't a complete list for obvious reasons. So workplace flexibility. Most office environments are open plan. We often don't have the benefit of each having private offices. So what would this look like? Well, reducing sensory distractions, use of meeting rooms when needed, permission to use noise-cancelling headphones during certain times of the day, redesigns of shared working spaces, maybe introducing cubicles or reducing the amount of people in a certain section. If you're in an organisation where you're hot desking, having a dedicated bookable space that is a quiet zone where no conversations can occur. Some organisations have bookable soundproof cubicles. That can be a workplace accommodation that benefits for all. Schedule flexibility. For some, driving into work or getting the train in peak hours can be sensory overload. Or they have projects that require some quiet time in the day, but either before or after employees are on site. So maybe allowing people to work different hours, doing 7 to 3 instead of a 9 to 5, or permitting the ability to work from home for some days. Minimising marginal jobs to increase time on essential job duties. Time management and organisational skills can be a challenge for us, especially if our employer wants us to focus on specific job duties over others. What could this look like? Requesting the ability to either share these responsibilities with a colleague or to delegate these responsibilities elsewhere entirely can allow us to focus on what's more important to the employer. For example, we use tape backups in my organisation. It was a responsibility of mine for about 18 months or so to ensure the machine was loaded up with tapes and that was exported on time for off-site collection. It took about 2 to 3 hours of my week. I was able to delegate this job to a colleague who wasn't bound to time-sensitive workflows, and they were able to incorporate that into their job duties. This allowed me to ensure I could focus on more time-pressing matters, being in help desk. Allowing the use of assistive technology. This can mean timers, calendars, speech-to-text or text-to-speech software, and spell checkers. All of us use assistance technology in the form of spell checker every day, but there are more options out there to assist those with dyslexia or dyscalculia. This can mean technologies to better assist with our difficulties. This can mean apps or some checks by colleagues before notes are included in projects, for examples. Some of these may be subscription-based, which could be a request for your employer to cover. Accommodations don't have to be purchased either. You may ask for some assistance from your manager in planning your day, or make plans and check with them to ensure they're happy with the projects you're working on. Supervisor or co-supervisor support. More feedback from your supervisor or manager, adjustments or differences made to instructions provided for tasks, asking for more clarity in delegated tasks. Some of us only receive feedback from managers at annual reviews. Pushing these to occur more often, maybe once a quarter, could be a way to ensure you're keeping up with your expectations requested by your employer. Breaking up big projects into smaller tasks. Meeting with your manager to aid in breaking up tasks into smaller chunks. This may look like a project with 10 smaller tasks. Being allocated in criticality, enforced deadlines, and resources required to get the job done, along with short check-ins to ensure you're keeping up and whether you need additional assistance or more time. Or body doubling. It's a productivity strategy relying on a co-worker to keep you on track. Their job is to assist in minimising distractions and to keep you focused on the task at hand. These tasks aren't necessarily difficult, but annoying tasks. Sometimes it's just having someone next to you is the motivation enough to get it done. Support from different stakeholders, peer mentoring programs, aid through employee assistance programs, executive function coaching, workplace coaching to help focus on areas such as planning, prioritization, organisational skills, etc. In a lot of cases, we know that we want to improve how we work and be more efficient, but we don't know what strategies can help us. Having someone work through some processes with us and see our job duties objectively could better assess us in how we work and in our day-to-day lives. And workplace adjustments, workstation adjustments, allowing for a bigger monitor or dual monitors, the addition of a whiteboard or other aids to allow you to work in different ways. And last but not least, communication strategies. Many of us struggle with communication. This can be in many ways interpreting intent, conveying ourselves to others in an acceptable manner. Many people can see us as being too serious or too direct. It's often because we're seeking clarification on a subject and want direct answers. It can be hard to read between the lines. Navigating the corporate jargon thrown around can be also a nightmare. Discussions with your supervisor or manager on how best to address these concerns to ensure that no one feels that we're targeting them or being abrasive. If you want to find out more about accommodations you're considering presenting to your employer, the JAN, or Job Accommodation Network, is a US-based organisation specialising in job accommodation assistance, and they have a resource named SOAR, the Searchable Online Accommodation Resource. This has a variety of search terms and resources to help those who are US-based, but it may be helpful to some in the audience that live in other regions. Now that we've discussed some reasonable accommodations, let's discuss some unreasonable accommodations. Most of these, unfortunately, are real. Removing essential duties from your job description. If your employer expects you to manage Macs in your organisation and you don't want to do that anymore, a workplace accommodation is not going to fix that. A new job is. You may have an opportunity to transition into an existing role or a different role in the same organisation, but that's not a workplace accommodation. Requesting adjustments that impact other employees. Relocating away from your colleagues where which could impact on essential processes. Requesting that the office be quiet at all times. Non-work related equipment. Asking for a back massage chair. Asking your employer to cover the cost of your gym membership. Covering your Netflix subscription. These are not appropriate. Unlimited breaks. Taking 30-minute breaks every hour is not a reasonable ask. Permanent reduction in productivity. Asking for the reduction of essential duties that would cause impact to other colleagues or the organisation. And last, inappropriate work hours. Asking to work night hours when your company works during daytime is not going to work. Now that we've provided some examples, let's discuss some research undertaken this year in Australia regarding workplace accommodations. The Australian Disability Network, a membership-based non-for-profit organisation that has relationships with organisations, conducted a study that was released early this year regarding the process behind workplace accommodations. The report, titled "Getting Workplace Adjustments Out of the Too Hard Basket," provided a lot of insights behind the experiences found by members of the network who asked for accommodations from their employers, along with organisations providing their perspective on the experiences they found on being on the receiving end of those requests. Nearly 400 survey respondents as members and nearly 200 survey respondents on behalf of organisations. I won't be covering this in full, but it's well worth a read. Before we proceed further with the study, I want to share this statement from the report. Nearly half found that they experienced increased job satisfaction because of receiving adjustments, and 40% of respondents found they experienced decreased job satisfaction because of not receiving adjustments. Processes behind requesting assistance was too hard. Organisations were not proactive enough when it came to being supportive and welcoming of those who are neurodivergent. Attitudes, unconscious or conscious, and bias were found to be common. People with disabilities felt discriminated against by their employers' attitudes and organisational culture, and some resort to masking rather than requesting adjustments to risk facing stigma and rejection from their colleagues in the workplace. We feel daunted by the experience of having to disclose personal circumstances to request adjustments. Some of us, as a result, decide not to proceed with the request process and instead mask our disability rather than making the request, which can lead to burnout. 84% of organisations consider that increased access to a broader talent pool is one of the great benefits of workplace adjustments. They found that making the adjustment process more accessible and easy to follow, that it improved physical, mental and emotional health of employees, that it increased job satisfaction, career progression and overall contributions to their work. But let's break down those who are disabled or neurodiverse we're looking for. Consistency of policies and approaches to navigating systems. Better tracking and measuring of the effectiveness of workplace accommodations and better tracking of employees' level of satisfaction once they were received. Through that process, humanising the adjustments process, having conversations with people rather than just filling in online forms. Better education of managers regarding disability awareness, providing methods of those with disability or neurodiversity to provide anonymous feedback on what they think should be done. More flexible options for job applicants. Again, having questions in advance, the ability to be having someone with a disability on the review panel. Organisations need to do more with communication. But the biggest by far was working from home. Although an adjustment for me, I was used to working in the office 5 days a week, and as I'm sure many were, I personally felt I was most productive at home. So now that we've just discussed workplace accommodations, what it is, some of the examples of what it can be, what it can't be, information from the perspective of both an individual and an organisation, I'd like to finally cover what happens in the event that you're not successful. Well, you may master compensate for your lack of support and burn out as a result. You may become dissatisfied with your job and not put in the effort that you were before. Or you leave, you look to go elsewhere. I'm sorry I can't leave you here today with the perfect solution to the issue, but all I can do is make you aware of it. But as a summary, that accommodations are unique, but they can have benefits for all. Now that we've covered how to improve workplaces with recruitment and with accommodations, let's discuss how we can support neurodiverse talent. Your organisation may have some of the implementations in place on the screen there, or working on adding them in. Some of them are required by law, and some of them are considered best practices. So for example, with committees, equality, diversity or inclusion committees are becoming increasingly common in organisations. We have one where I work, and they're slowly working on requests and policies to make improvements for employees overall. We also have a wellbeing committee, which I'm a member of, which covers off promoting physical, mental and emotional wellbeing for staff. This came into play due to the introduction of workplace health and safety laws, which I'll cover next. We have occupational health and safety laws in Australia, and a bit like the US, each state and territory has their own laws and regulations. In Victoria, changes are made with legislation where psychological health can be considered a reason behind a workplace health safety claim. This is where EDI and wellbeing committees have come into play. This means that companies have an obligation by law to have a safe working place, not only in physical safety, but in psychological safety. We're seeing this trend happening across other jurisdictions. And as a result, we're seeing changes in organisations where discussions around neurodiverse staff and mental health support services are becoming more commonplace. Training opportunities for managers, organisations, human resources, or people and culture as we refer to them in my own company, are looking into training programs for managers regarding neurodiversity, helping them with better understanding of their needs and strengths, helping to reduce stigma and misunderstandings, and creating a more accepting workplace. Employees sharing stories. Some members of the neurodiverse community may wish to share their experience as a neurodiverse individual in the workplace at their employer. But seeing this from senior or C-level staff who are also neurodiverse would provide us with examples of people of neurodiversity succeeding in higher positions. Neurodiversity staff networks. Having a staff network for those who are neurodiversity. It may look like a Microsoft team, it could be a bi-weekly coffee catch-up, an opportunity to discuss how we're travelling. Taking feedback on processes and systems. Many of us struggle with phone calls or other forms of communication, but this can extend to payroll systems, leave request functions, and other processes that may be cumbersome. I'd implore employers to provide either an anonymous or known method of providing feedback. This could provide positive changes to all staff in made areas based on potentially anonymous feedback. And staff surveys. At our organisation, we have a yearly staff survey regarding a variety of topics, asking whether staff feel safe at their employer, that they feel they have opportunities to progress their career. Seeing questions regarding neurodiversity or disability would be nice to see, to ensure that questions are being offered as staff and culture changes occur year on year. Mentoring programs. I was fortunate enough to have access to a mentoring program a couple of months ago, which lasted about 6 months, where I spoke to an individual in my industry, also in medical research, but someone who didn't have an IT background and actually worked in philanthropy. Having the ability to communicate my concerns regarding my neurodiversity, amongst other things, to someone who was receptive, made me feel like the things I was discussing weren't stupid and were actually valid. If you have access to a mentoring program where you are matched with people in a similar industry, being able to work through short, medium and long-term goals and concerns makes the process of navigating the workplace so much more achievable. Back to that statement I made earlier, meeting one of us doesn't mean you've met all of us. Basically, be personable. Don't make policies thinking that you've seen one setup means it's going to work for everyone. Being flexible in your approach will net you better results going forward. As a colleague, if you meet someone new, don't make assumptions on their neurodiversity should they choose to share that with you or that you hear from other colleagues. If I saw an organisation that had a lot of these programs, committees, and was working on improving things in their organisation, it'd be a place I'd want to work in. And honestly, these are the questions I'd be asking during the interview process for a job position. Do you have an EDI committee? How often do they meet? What policies are they working on, etc. Now that we've discussed what neurodiversity is, our strengths, difficulties, medications, masking, burnout, benefits to organisations, building inclusive workspaces, building local networks, we're finally at building awareness and advocacy, which is where all of you come in. I hope you've seen through this session that we can provide enormous benefits to organisations that support and nurture us, and that we'll strive to do our best work if we're given the opportunity to do so. But it isn't just about asking for workplace accommodations and calling it a day. That these accommodations have a positive impact for all staff, that committees are working on the interest of improving morale, and workplace culture is inherently a net positive for all. So what I'd like to leave you today with is this. When you head back to work, take into consideration the few things. Share what you've learnt today with your colleagues. If you're a member of an organisation's wellbeing or EDI committee, just have neurodiversity at the back of your mind when discussing policies, procedures, changes, and events coming up. If you're a manager, organise some kind of training for you and your staff regarding neurodiversity in the workplace. And how you can leverage that. If you're on a hiring board for new positions in your team, think about neurodiversity and whether your organisation has a process for workplace accommodations or make them aware of that. If you already work with a colleague who is neurodiverse and you oversee some part of their job, see if there's anything you can do better to assist them. Maybe it's providing clear written instructions when asked, checking in on them to see how they're travelling, giving them channels for feedback, or respecting differences in how you and they work. But finally, be an ally. Be thoughtful and sympathetic towards your neurodiverse colleagues. They might be struggling in ways that you're not aware of. Thank you.
All right, any questions? I'll come to you with the mic. All right.
Hi. Thanks so much for sharing your story. I think it was really interesting. You've certainly given me a lot to think, especially about the hiring processes, which I'm currently going through right now. But I'm curious, I know you've said many times you can't speak for everyone that's neurodiverse, diversity is right in the name, but I'm curious, is there anything in your experience that your leadership did to make you feel more comfortable sharing your needs or kind of what you needed from them?
That's a really good question. When I was diagnosed, the first person I talked to was my manager and discussed with them. And through, I suppose once I had that focus at the back of my mind, I started to notice other people in my organisation that were also neurodiverse. And so through that, not saying up to someone, it's like, hi, are you neurodiverse? Because that's really awkward and really awful. But through that, you sort of learn through that process of you speak to them, you see how receptive they are without honestly divulging too much. And then you slowly start pushing narratives, pushing information to them, saying, hey, have you considered this? Have you considered that? And if you're at some point where I've fortunately been on hiring boards before for new positions, just having that at the back of my mind of, potentially questions to ask or just seeing how they interact through the process. Are they looking at the camera or are they looking off? Things like that. But are they still listening? Are they still engaging in the process?
Again, really great presentation. One question I have for you. So our company does do an annual survey just like yours. The problem that I've seen is that they group all neurodiversity of any kind into disability, and that's it. How would you approach that with company leadership to kind of maybe get that survey adjusted in the future?
It's a really tough one because it comes down to what each organisation, what's their definition of disability and neurodiversity. A lot of them lump it into the same, and it's not the worst thing. It depends on the way that the survey is written. If the questions are optional, then you can put in what you want, then it works out fine. But as mentioned, some people see themselves as disabled and some people don't. So that whole conversation is really tight. I think having an organisation that has a clearly defined definition that they do provide to staff and having maybe those questions separated would be understandable for people going like, oh, okay, I identify as neurodiverse, but I don't identify as disabled, or identify as both, or identify as disabled only. So I think that's probably really the only way to make those sort of adjustments.
Thanks for sharing. I was wondering on a more personal level if there's anything in particular that maybe your parents or caregivers, or that if you could go back in time, one or two things that you would have liked to have had support with or done differently, or something in that realm. Is it really just education and early intervention, or are there other things in particular that you could think of that you would have liked to have had?
That's a really good question. Honestly, the big thing for me was I would love to have been diagnosed earlier in life. A lot of the neurodiverse training materials, a lot of the information is surrounded around children. So having that support at an earlier stage in development allows them to get used to things like medications, learning different methods of how they can interact with the world and how they can interact with themselves. So when they hit the workforce, they're mostly prepared. They're potentially in a position where they can sort of help each other out. But at the same time, I'm a really terrible advocate for myself. So, being able to say, like, this is what I'd love to do differently. I think in a lot of cases, it's just, you don't really realize something is different until it hits you in the face. And then you go, okay, I didn't handle that quite well. Maybe I need to work on, being more personable with people, or not being as abrasive, which is something we're just constantly working with.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. It's pretty fearless of you. It was so relatable. I could relate to so much of that. I didn't get my diagnosis till I was 52.
Yep.
Subsequent to my adult son being diagnosed, and it was like, oh crap. And it was, on the one hand, it was so relieving. It was like, oh, yes, I get it. On the other hand, there was this grieving of like, what if, what if how could life have been different? It is what it is.
Yes. No, I when I was diagnosed, I went through exactly the same thing you did, which was, it was the grieving, reading those school reports, seeing it clearly written there. Like, how did no one see this? Going through the process of trying to be diagnosed, which is expensive and laborious, and finding out that at the end of the day, they go, okay, you've got it. Here's a pill that will fix it for you, which is not the answer in all cases. It's challenging to grapple with that. But over time, you become more accepting and go, well, I am here where I am now. I wouldn't have got here without how different I am and how I interact with the world. And, I wouldn't be up here speaking about it if I hadn't been. So I'm grateful in some ways, but there is a little bit of grieving there while you think about what could have been. But at the same time, I try not to dwell on it too much.
Hey, thank you again for that presentation. Again, I was like, I feel attacked. But when you mentioned a lot about the mentorship and having someone to be able to discuss, a lot of this neurodivergence with, my mentee last year, found so much help being able to express, the anxiety issues, the burnout issues to me, and just like being able to speak it all through. And kind of just a plug, unfortunately, not unfortunate, but the Mac Admins Foundation is actually doing a mentorship program as well that you can sign up for, and they cover a variety of topics. I talked to them at their booth earlier yesterday, and they got all my information, and I was like, I'd love to see what it's all about.
No, definitely. I spoke with Chris yesterday myself, and I think I might find myself in a position where, a lot of people don't want to be mentors because they don't like to think that they don't know something. But I think, I might take the delve in there myself to go, let's give it a go and see what it's like. Now that I've been a mentee and I've had a mentor and that process was really beneficial for me, I hopefully want to do the same for others and have that opportunity that people can have to learn more about either IT or just, not even IT, just how do I interact with my user base? How do I deal with things? How do I deal with the politics within my organization? Those are the conversations that are really useful, I think, especially for us.
Yeah, my question is, so what's next? Like, in terms of trying to get more exposure, I think, this is a topic that seemed like it's kind of undercover, but yet it needs to have more transparency and whatnot. So in your opinion, what resources, whether it's national or local, do you think could be possible to educate others?
That's a really good question. Well, for me, finding out through the research for this talk that there's a disability network, I probably will join as a member and use that as an opportunity to learn about the disability network that's based in Australia for me, and figuring out how people are navigating the systems that we all deal with. But I think realistically, it's keep having the conversation, keep talking about it, because someone at Penn State last year, I believe, did a talk about their ADHD, and that was honestly the inspiration for this talk. That I was like, someone's talking about that at a tech conference, something I'd never considered. Maybe I should do something like that. So I'm hopeful that, you know, regionally and through our network as Mac admins, that we have the opportunity to keep talking about this and keep discussing it. And I think through that's where we'll find some hopefully interesting talks, interesting perspectives of how people are dealing with the challenges of day-to-day life and also being in the workplace.
Any more questions? Going once? Twice? All right. Thank you all for attending the Embracing Neurodiversity in IT session today. Enjoy the rest of JNUC.
Thank you.